anybody who was born in the late 60s, let's say, has a perception in their mind that that's what winters used to be, because they were born around then. They were 5, 6, 7 years old with these massive snows, which for kids is just an amazing memory, that everything else pales in comparison. But in reality, those years were really the outlier years. And even though we've been below normal on snowfall for more years than not over the last 5 to 10 years or so, we haven't necessarily been extremely low on snowfall. So that's one of those. When I mentioned the lack of a snowfall trend yet in Champaign-Urbana, mainly it's because snowfall is really variable year to year. We have a huge amount of variability, and when you're trying to detect some sort of trend in a data set like warming temperatures, wetter weather, whatever it may be, having a lot of change from year to year can really mess up that trend, and that's what snowfall gives us. The reason I said yet is because we expect that with continued warming of our winters, snowfall will become less and less. And certainly one thing that we have seen that's very perceptible, and we see in the data, is a lack of snow depth. So if we do get snowfall, we may get 4 or 5 inches of snow in a single day. It's just not sticking around for as long because we're not keeping the air temperatures below that kind of high 20s, low 30s mark that you need to keep that snowpack. And so instead, we'll see snow last for a few days before it melts. Then we get the next snowfall, and so on and so forth. So that's really the biggest trend in snow that we're seeing across Champaign-Urbana. As far as like how much snow actually falls, don't really see that trend right. Yeah, for winter temperature trends are the largest of any season. And that's not just in Champaign-Urbana, where we've been measuring weather and winter since the 1880s, but all across Illinois. We see winter is warming at 5 times the rate of summer. That's for average temperatures, and that's meteorological winter, December, January, February. That period is warming faster than any other period on record. And even if we just go back the last 50 years, so like a mid-century, we still see those trends. And so what that means is that really by a temperature measure, our winters are changing more than any other season. And the snow depth was one piece of that I mentioned that we definitely see, is that we just don't simply carry a snowpack as long in the winter as we used to. Soil temperatures are another one where we see our soil temperatures are warming as well. So it used to be that in central Illinois we would freeze our temperatures down to maybe 5 or 6 inches in late December, early January, and that would carry through until March. And now we're more in an ephemeral freeze-thaw cycle. So we'll freeze the soils because we'll get a lot of really cold air. Then the next week it thaws and freeze-thaw. That kind of cycle happens more. As far as precipitation is concerned, winter is getting wetter. So we see an increase in total precipitation overall, but I mentioned not a perceptible trend in snowfall, which means more of that precipitation is coming as rain. It is coming as liquid forms of precipitation, which is something that kind of we deal with differently during the winter time. So those are the dominant trends, that winter is warming, winter is wetting, as in a more precipitation trend, but that warming trend for winter is far and away the largest of any season. When we look at winter temperatures, so I mentioned December 1st through February, whenever the end of February is, if we look at every single day's temperature over that time period for the last 100 years or so, it's not just that the average is moving warm, but actually it's the very coldest conditions that are increasing the fastest. This may be hard for people to kind of wrap their minds around, but basically what that means is we're getting way more days, or I should say we're getting way fewer nights where the temperature is minus 10, minus 15, minus 20 degrees. We're getting way fewer days now than we did, 50, 60 years ago, where the high temperature stays below 20 degrees, right? But we're not necessarily seeing a bunch of days where it's getting into the 80s in January. That just doesn't happen very often. So it's not just that the average temperature is shifting warm, but the whole distribution of daily temperatures is changing. So we're having far fewer extremely cold events. The reason I bring that up is that one of the implications of warmer winters, people may think, sounds great. One of the implications of warmer winters is a potential to make a more conducive environment for non-native or invasive species of plants and animals. And those are primarily driven, not entirely, but primarily driven by those very, very cold temperatures. So armadillos is a really good example where we see that we still get very cold, but it doesn't happen as often, so those armadillos can push farther north, have fewer mortality in events during the wintertime, and then they can kind of gain traction like an army continuously pushing forward. So we see those kinds of species making their way in Illinois, in some cases endemic in parts of southern Illinois, where 20, 30 years ago we would never see them. Certainly the non-native invasive species of plants and animals, that means weeds pressure, insect pressure, disease pressure. It's harder to study. Certainly College of ACEs and folks that I collaborate with in the ag school here in Illinois are studying this thing of how climate change affects agriculture. And obviously during the growing season we see those impacts more directly, but the winter does matter insofar as we just mentioned the pests, weed and insect pressure and disease pressure are really important. And so the same way I mentioned the armadillos, certain types of species of insect pests may be able to overwinter farther north or come earlier than they used to, and that kind of disrupts the treatment sort of scheduling window for farmers. So if you would normally treat for this pest and at this rate in June, let's say, well, perhaps that's shifting closer to Memorial Day. And that, of course, compresses the amount of time you can plant and do other kind of spring field work. So it just kind of changes the decision window a little bit, too. At the same time, our specialty growers, so those that are especially tree fruit, of course, their crop is not just susceptible to what's going on in the growing season, but the whole season around. So what we see are changes in the timing of the phenology of those fruits, peaches, apples, plums, so on and so forth. They may be breaking dormancy earlier, flowering earlier, making more susceptible to freeze damage, things like that. So we definitely see the impacts to agriculture as well, even though we don't necessarily equate winter with agriculture impacts. If we freeze and stay freezing, right, stay below that sub-freezing area, all the water around that concrete is frozen. It's stressful on the road and the pavement, but what's far more stressful is to freeze and then thaw, and then freeze and then thaw. And that concrete and that pavement is experiencing expansion and contraction, expansion, contraction. As semis are driving over it time after time again, it's a lot more stressful on our road surfaces. So certainly dealing with potholes and just general road construction more with those freeze-thaw processes as opposed to one deep freeze is definitely a problem. In northern Illinois, the earliest kind of snowfall we've seen in northern Illinois is kind of the second week of September. There hasn't been on the record a August measurable snowfall in northern Illinois. There are tales of everything. You know better than anybody, Jacob. There are tales of everything, but there are tales of people seeing snow in August, but there's really no way to verify that. There hasn't been like newspaper articles published or anything like that, just folks who say, one person called up my office one day and said he remembered he was in a conference in the Loop in the 50s, and it was late August, and he walked outside and it was snowing. And could I confirm that? And I was like, there's no way I could confirm that. So, but the earliest kind of measurable snowfall in Illinois we have is that second week of September. Here in Champaign-Urbana, it is very, very early October for measurable snowfall. Growing degree days are usually, we see them measured at kind of a base of like usually about 50 degrees or 65 degrees, depending on which calculation you use. And certainly when the growing season, we see an increase in the growing degree day accumulation during the growing season. So our growing seasons aren't just getting longer, the time between the last spring freeze and the first fall freeze, but the growing seasons are warmer, which means we're accumulating more of those growing degree units. We talked about bad impacts to specialty growers in agriculture. One of the perhaps positives is that longer, warmer growing season can make it more conducive to grow commercially viably crops that we wouldn't think about before here in Illinois. The bad news about that is that it's not just the crops we want, but some of the weeds that also love a warmer Illinois too. But, we see things like commercially viable peaches in central and northern Illinois where, 20, 30 years ago, those were mostly a southern Illinois crop. So that expansion is partly due to warming winters, partly due to the expansion of the growing season as well. Snowfall, trends in tornadoes are tough, and things like hailstorms. One of the things that we can take away, though, from some of the great work that they're doing up at NIU, Walker Ashley and Alex Haberly and their group, is one of the trends they're detecting, both in the past as well as projections for the future, is an expansion of that kind of peak severe weather period of time. Right, so we can get severe weather, and we have all year round, but it usually see that peak between April and June. we're seeing trends towards more higher frequency of severe storms, including tornadoes, in that February-March period of time. And real quick, one of the issues of that, other than just having more tornadoes, is that if a tornado sets down in February versus in April or May, it's much more likely that it's going to set down when it's dark out, because our days are shorter in February. And a nocturnal tornado is many more times deadly than a tornado of the same strength during the day, because people are in their houses, they may not be aware, they may not be able to see it. Those kind of factors do play in as far as the vulnerability of tornadoes. So even in just an expansion of that severe weather into February and March, increases the risk of bad things happening from tornadoes, injuries, fatalities, that sort of thing. We have seen a lot of big events in November and December, especially recently. The December 2021 outbreak in southern Illinois did affect us, and then we had another one not too long ago that you would know better than I would, but of these tornado outbreaks, right? And those are something that are also being studied right now, is kind of the effect of climate change on tornado outbreaks. And that's actually something we see a little bit of a clearer signal for, is not so much we're going to have a bunch more EF3, EF4, EF5 tornadoes, but more days when we have the potential to have a multiple tornado event, kind of a tornado outbreak event where we may get 5 or 10 or 20 tornadoes in a single day. And we've seen those recently in November, December. Can't say that there's enough evidence to point to that there's some kind of trend there, but all of those events are good reminders that we need to be severe weather aware all year. So there's snow on the ground right now when we look out, but there's times, and I think Andrew Pritchard has this great video of a tornado moving across the sun, and he pans down, there's snow on the ground. We need to be severe weather aware all year long, because we can get those kind of events in November, December, and all the way through winter. Winter warming is our biggest effect of climate change. Climate change is an effect of what we call global warming, which is just the increase in the global average temperatures that's driven by higher greenhouse gas concentrations in our atmosphere. So more carbon dioxide, more methane are the big ones in our atmosphere as a result of human activities over the last 150 years or so. And what that's doing is it's increasing the average temperature of the whole Earth. But our climates are complex, so some climates are getting warmer, some climates are getting drier, ours getting warmer, particularly in the winter. And